This episode of Beyond Distribution was recorded live at our GTDC Vendor Summit in Oceanside, California. During this panel session, Frank moderates a conversation focused on the latest technology trends and the many ways distribution empowers sales and adoption. Our panelists today are Marty Bauerlein, Chief Commercial and Consumer Officer for D&H, Kirk Robinson, EVP and President of North America for Ingram Micro, Kristin Russell, President Global ECS for Aero Electronics, and Patrick Zammit, COO of TD SYNNEX. Enjoy the discussion.
This is great. I'm excited that every year we do this, and this panel gets great reviews because people in the audience are interested to hear what you all have to say, right? Because as I said earlier, you're leading the largest distributors on the planet, and I could do some quick math, but it's probably, I don't know, well over $100 billion of product is flowing through the companies that these four folks are helping run. So let me ask each of them, I'm sure they're well known, everybody knows who they are, but let me ask each of them to quickly just introduce themselves.
I start?
Yeah.
So Patrick Zammit, now 1 month in my new job, CEO TD SYNNEX, and before I was in charge of Europe and APJ.
Hi everyone, Kristin Russell. I am the Global President of the Enterprise Computing Solutions Division at Aero Electronics.
Good morning everybody, Kirk Robinson. I have responsibility for North America for Ingram Micro.
Hi everyone, Marty Bauerlein, Chief Commercial and Consumer Officer at D&H.
So Kristin, let me start with you. So, as you and I have talked before, you came out of sort of the end user world, right?
Yeah.
You spent time as a CIO and you've got very significant experience in that space. Clearly, the pace of innovation is accelerating and will continue to accelerate. What types of services and support do distributors need to provide in order to support that pace, right? In other words, what services are going to be needed as we continue to see this innovation?
Yeah, great, Frank. So yeah, I have spent my time in technology in a lot of different types of roles. I was a CIO. I'm a recovering CIO. I don't know what stage I'm at in that process, but you're right. It is changing so much. But what I love about distribution, in particular, is that we have a really privileged place in the market because we sit between the makers of technology, those that are innovating new technologies, and those that can enable that technology for end user outcomes and business outcomes. And I think that it's a fabulous place to be because we get to see the entire ecosystem and really evaluate how we can actually lessen that complexity for both suppliers and for channel partners. And for me, it comes down to really 3 things: people, products, and platform. So we're in a relationship business, and when I was a CIO, I used to say that I bought from my friends, right? Because your friends, they were trusted advisors, they had your back, they understood what you were struggling with. And I think from a distribution perspective, we can never lose sight of the fact that we're in a people business. And that means that we have to stay close to our suppliers and our channel partners, understand what they're going through, provide the technical expertise to be able to help them to get products out to market, and then for channel partners to be able to solve that complexity. From a product standpoint, at Aero, we really focus on the high end of enterprise IT, and we do that so that we can have a very broad portfolio of products that work together. Technology is not becoming less complicated, it's becoming much more complicated, and so it's multi-solution environments. So we have to be really thoughtful about how products work together. And then services, what are the services that we need to provide? And I'm sure my colleagues would say the same, but we're being asked as distributors to get more involved in a lot of services in the go-to-market value chain. Everything from marketing as a service to lead gen to, of course, distribution, integration, support services, renewals. So we need to be thinking about that. And then lastly, platform. This is the digital era, and I like to think about, at Aero, we have a platform called AeroSphere, and it's not just a marketplace, right? Because a marketplace people need to know what they're wanting to buy. And because of the complexity of technology, I really think about the digital distribution platforms of the future have to be almost digital workbenches, right? For people to come in and really figure out what products to find and buy and manage through a digital platform.
Yep, good. Patrick, first of all, congratulations on the new role. As you mentioned, your previous role was running, EMEA and APJ. And obviously, over the last couple of years, you've been dealing in that part of the world with, very significant and difficult macroeconomic issues, and particularly in the European theater. So, what actions, since obviously as part of dealing with that, you probably have a viewpoint on what actions distributors can take to help suppliers and their customers operate in that type of, unstable environment, if you will, or tough, difficult environment.
Yeah, I would add that we have also the geopolitical issues.
Yeah, right.
Middle East and Ukraine.
Right.
So, yeah. I wanted to look at the last 3 years, in fact. And when I was reflecting on the question, I remember when the whole Europe went on lockdown,
Yep.
What was the first action we took? And in fact, the first request from customers was, can you help us financially? It was about credit, financing, and the vendors had the same concern. How do we make sure that we are not going to lose, in particular, the whole SMB reseller space? So the first action we took at the time was really to put in place extended payment terms, new financing means, so that indeed we could secure that customer base with some help, by the way, from the vendors, and it worked very well. The second thing which came then was, can you help me on my cost structure? And I agree that, to help, so we can scale, we can scale, and it's true that what we see is that the resellers or the partners are refocusing. And so there are a few tasks which are not core to them, which they would like to outsource to us. So again, that's the second thing where we have played a role and will continue to play a role, is all around operational excellence, okay? And so that's the second thing. But then the third thing is, so we know what happened during those 3 years. Endpoint went through the roof. Last year, we had the correction. Infrastructure struggled much more. We had a fantastic year last year, on the other hand. So, but because of the richness of technology, what the partners have asked for is, where should I invest for the future? Okay, and that's where I think distribution always plays a key role. We have the chance to play end-to-end. We have access to all the technologies. We have a good visibility on what technologies are going to have momentum. And basically what we did during those 3 years is help our partners to diversify a little bit their business. Yeah. And so enablement and so on, that's a core competency for us, and that made a big difference.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, as we continue this evolution and continue the digital distribution, a lot of it still comes back to financing and credit and some of the basics that your customers need and have needed for a long time, right? And that kind of fuels the industry, frankly. So Kirk, you've served as Ingram Micro's North America president for quite some time, which is a good thing, and got a lot of experience in the space. You've seen a lot of, ups and downs, right?
Yeah.
23 was clearly a challenging year, right? And
Yep.
Patrick kind of mentioned it because we had seen, huge upswings, and then, we've seen regardless what the overall growth was, we know there were certain areas that were really challenged and some that, weren't. So as you looked into your, crystal ball for 2024, and obviously you've seen a lot of, what we talked about today,
Yep.
But how are you feeling about that?
I think if you look at the industry trends, more partners are moving towards digital transformation, adopting advanced solutions, which is great because it gives the partners the ability to expand their services offerings down to their end customer. And when you look at that, I think there's a couple of things that we can all do, distributors and vendors, to help our partners. One of them is, how do we help them become more of a strategic partner with their end customer? How do we help them deliver value that goes way beyond the classic IT support? The second one is how do we help them focus on business outcomes? If we do that, I think we all prosper. So whether a partner is focused on classic lines like networking and security, hybrid cloud, data center, or if they're looking at some of the new areas we've looked at today, AI, machine learning, automation, they are still the difference maker in the ecosystem, from the end customer, the partner, distributor, the vendor. And right now, I would say they're more valued than ever by the corporations they work with, big or small. And they're also getting a lot of attention from the vendor community, from their peers, and from PE firms, because they're driving more and more of their business to ARR and MRR and becoming more profitable. So I think when you wrap all that up, that's the opportunity for vendors and distributors in 2024, and I think there's mutual growth for all of us in that and beyond.
Yeah, it was certainly encouraging to hear some of the, some of the data, some of the experts who, survey customers and what they're seeing. So that's good. So Marty, congratulations to you in your new role. So since you've taken the role, I know you've gone out on your listening tour, right? And I've gone out and talked to your customers to get their view on what do they think, how are they feeling. So it'd be interesting to hear what you hear from your partners, your customers, and also, what are some of the maybe headwinds that might be out there?
Yeah. So first, Frank, I want to give you a compliment.
Oh, great. I love that.
24 years ago, I met Frank in Palm Springs, and you were an amazing advocate for the channel back then, and you still are. 100%. And you're calling yourself elderly, but I would say you don't let the old man in. But
well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
So I would say from my conversations, opportunities, obviously you guys have heard all of them. AI is huge. Windows 11 refresh and cybersecurity, those are the top three. I actually spoke with a managed service provider on Monday in Tampa, and they're a $40 million MSP. Wow. And 95% of their revenue is recurring. And I asked them some questions. I said, where are your largest labor costs, right? And they said it was in level 1 and level 2 support. And I said, well, how are you going to leverage AI in your business? And what they said is they would like in the next 3 to 5 years, and they were willing to spend $10 million to have virtual assistants literally talk to their customers when they call in for level 1 support and level 2 support. And I said, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to eliminate roles? He said, yes, we are definitely going to eliminate roles, but we will make so much more money that it's going to allow us to go buy more MSPs. So I see a huge consolidation that could happen in the market because of AI. Second, the Windows 11 refresh, that's going to be huge for us. Yep. If you look at the market right now, yes, it's been down substantially, so we're all kind of hoping as a group that comes back. And when the advanced solutions business is kicking in and the endpoint business is kicking in, it's goodness for all of us in this room. So I'm looking forward to that coming back. And then finally, cybersecurity. I actually spoke with Bob Bukowski, who Dave mentioned earlier. He's on 5 boards. And I asked him last week, I talk to him almost every week, he's my mentor, and I said, hey Bob, what are the big topics in board discussions? And number 1 is cybersecurity. It's not AI. It's literally cybersecurity, and I think there's still huge opportunity for consulting services around cybersecurity. And if you look at public companies, some of them in this room, and you read their 10Ks, there's been attacks, and they have to divulge these publicly through their 10Ks, and you'd be very surprised when you reach through there and you dig in on the 100-page 10Ks, and you find that there's phishing and cyber attacks in many of the public companies right now. So they have to get that straight before, and maybe use AI to help out. From a headwind standpoint, I would say it was mentioned earlier, it's, if we're going to go into a recession. And if the CIOs of these large organizations decide to go in neutral, that's going to impact all the growth rates that we're looking forward to. And you'll see guys like Gordon Lord in the back driving an Uber on the weekend. So that's it.
Well, I think, as Crawford said, what's happening is the gap between, GDP and IT, sort of growth has kind of stabilized, and there might be just enough going on with with the opportunities that we may be immune to some degree. Now, obviously, if there's some big macroeconomic event, I mean, as I said, we sat here in the September because that's when we did our event, September 2019. And we're all sitting here talking about what we thought was going to happen, and 6 months later we have a global pandemic, and you could not have planned for that. You just something you can't plan for. So, I do think that the headwinds, to me, are probably macroeconomic kinds of things. It's stuff that, as we sit here, we're not like, what else could happen, right? What other war could break out or something, which is scary. But so, Kristin, going back to you, one of the things that we talked about a little bit here was emerging vendors, and that's the lifeblood of kind of what we're doing here. And we all can sit there and think about, well, geez, I should have invested in Palo Alto when they were just starting out, or NetApp, or one of the other companies that we've seen have tremendous growth. And so clearly, I think it's important, and Dave mentioned it, and we work closely with Dave, as I know everybody in this panel does, but he mentioned how we really have to think about what can distributors do to effectively support those, emerging companies, and maybe think about them differently, a little bit differently than what you do for the traditional, vendors that have been in place for a while working with us. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this question, because I think a lot of tech vendors start in the US, right? And so their go-to plan for go-to-market is to go direct in the US, and then they think about distribution as they go for rest of world. And what I'm seeing is that the amount of competition and the need to scale and get to market quickly is actually forcing a lot of those emerging vendors to say, hey, I need to think about an off-payroll, supercharger, multiple force into my go-to-market, which is distribution. And so I think that that's happening, that demand is happening to us. What I think that we need to do is to think about them differently. And just to be totally transparent, I think at Arrow, we actually struggled with this for a lot of years, because our scale would kind of suffocate those emerging vendors. They wouldn't really know how to work in our systems and processes. We didn't really know how to scale down to help support them. And so, and I think Dan talked about this maybe earlier, but about a year ago, we started a totally new program called Accelerate. And Sandy Fryer, are you out there in the audience? Okay, she's kind of raising her hand. So Sandy runs this program for us because it was about how do we need to think about emerging suppliers differently and vendors, and what kind of almost customized types of programs can we put in place to support them in their unique time and maturity. And so that's been a really big aha for us, is that we can provide a lot of value, again, back to our wheelhouse of getting their products into markets that are difficult to serve directly, or that where they need scale. We can do that, but we needed to think differently about how to support them and really meet them where they're at, versus trying to force those emerging vendors to come into big distribution and try to flex to us. So we need to flex to them. And we had a great conversation last night about this as well, because there's some amazing new tech that's out there that we need to be able to help get into channel partners' hands so that they can create new solutions and drive business outcomes for their end user customers.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of, having worked for 3 pretty big companies over the years, who always were very good at selling into the enterprise. They all wanted to sell into SMB, right? Everybody wants to sell into SMB. And so what you would do is take an enterprise program and dumb it down, sell into MSP. Versus building a program up from the bottom, right? And it kind of reminds me of that as you were going through it. That's what I was thinking about. And that's not the approach. You've got to approach it differently, because they are differently. One of the things we try to do, by the way, on these panels is I try not to ask the same question of everybody, because then you get a lot of, well, as somebody said, but if any of you guys want to jump in on any of these questions, then just add anything, just feel free to do that, right? So Patrick, one of the, and this was interesting, and I didn't know this before I wrote this question, but when Crawford showed the emergence of, or the continued emergence of, as a service and consumption models, it's a great example of how, the business is just changing, and not just from a technology standpoint, from, a process standpoint, and the way technology is delivered, and the way customers want technology to be delivered. And I know all the distributors here have been working on that for a while, and this whole on-prem, off-prem kind of thing. But what does this transition mean for distributors, and how can you support, these changes? Because they're happening, and they're happening because customers want them to happen, which means we've got to react to it,
I'm going to start with a story. So I'm just 8 years in IT distribution. At the time I was at Avnet, and very happily on the component side. So Rick Amada, CEO at the time, says, Patrick, you need to move on the IT side and so on. So I was a little bit reluctant, gave me a report on cloud and all the prospects. So I said, okay, let's go. So obviously, first thing is I go meet with our key vendors. It was very interesting at the time. Every key vendor told me the same message. I mean, you are a hardware distributor. You have no future. So that was a very welcoming message. I went back home and wanted immediately my job back, the old one. So anyway, 8 years later, it's very clear. So discussions today are very different. I mean, all vendors moving to a subscription consumption model want to jump on our platforms, are asking us, how can you help us move from our traditional distribution model to a subscription consumption-based model? And I think one of the key capability of all of us here is our ability to transform and adjust to the new market realities. I mean, all those new technologies, so you take hybrid cloud, you take cybersecurity, you take AI now, are all requiring new go-to-markets, new value proposition, and even new operating models. I mean, again, the best example is the platforms we've developed to support a consumption model, the billing models, and so on. So, I mean, this is a key strength for us, and we are really leveraging it. AI is the new kid on the block. I mean, last year we thought it would be metaverse. Let's see how it evolves. I'm a little bit more confident with AI. Clearly, I think Copilot in particular is going to probably drive mass adoption of AI. But here again, I mean, we've developed an enablement program called Destination AI, just to take an example. And I mean, we are all consistently developing, I mean, what is required for our partners to be enabled and win, and most important for our vendors to take the products to market. And again, we've shown that we've been able to do it consistently, and whatever the technology is.
Yeah, that's for sure, and that's clearly been part of the evolution. So, Kirk, there's been a lot of discussion. I talked about it, in my opening, and we've continued to talk about it. But this whole notion of distributor-hosted platforms and marketplaces, clearly a major investment. I know. So I mentioned earlier what kinds of revenues you guys are collectively driving. It would be really interesting to understand what kind of investments, the size of the investments you've made, because I know they're significant, right?
You go first.
Yeah, massive investment in your platforms and the support that they provide. But as you think about it, what advantages do you see ultimately for your customers and obviously for the suppliers too, that get through the customers?
Very relevant question. I would say a platform that can take a partner from a transaction to a meaningful interaction is going to win. So Ingram Micro's platform, Experience Xvantage, we're looking at enabling our vendor partners and our customers with timely data insights. For our partners, it's also automated quoting, automated ordering. All of this is to take the complexity out of our business. That's one thing in our industry over the years. It gets more complex, as was mentioned. So we're very focused on how can we simplify that through all the things we're hearing about today. An example, talked to a customer who was out visiting their end customer, and in the course of the conversation, they said, hey, we need to refresh laptops. First, I was thrilled to hear that, but it was shy of the number I needed. But anyhow, he got his phone out, went onto the Xvantage app, looked up the customer, found the model, the configuration, and gave him a quote on the spot. So how do we take the time and the complexity out and replace it with more intelligent conversations with our partners and customers on how to grow the business? So what we're looking at is bringing a B2C experience to the B2B environment.
Mm-hmm. And over time, that ends up scaling all the way through, right? From end user customer, start there, through supplier, through solution provider, back down.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal, and that's sort of the promise. And so, what'll be interesting is when we get here together next year, and we talk about what progress we've made. It'll be really interesting to see, as the year unfolds, how quickly we begin to get there, because it's got to have the return on investment that you guys are all making, right? Very significant returns.
Next year, I'll get into the dollar amounts of investment.
Okay, great. We can't wait. You'll be allowed to at that point? Yeah, okay.
But I think,
someone
to
else
the
will.
point, I think the thing that I'd add is that for channel partners, this whole subscription economy, as consumers, we think of it as like, what's the big deal? We order from Amazon all the time, but it's actually, as many of you know, super complex for a channel partner to be able to deliver that single bill based on different units, different metrics, and then say, okay, here's your bill. So that's where we can help. And in many ways, our investment in our platforms are, have extended to the channel partners, right? So that you can actually leverage the investment that we have off of our platforms to be able to white label and then deliver your services through our platforms to your end users. So it's a really big game changer, I think, in terms of the role of distribution, of not being a hardware product schlepper anymore, but we are actually the trusted advisor for you to help grow your business in a more elegant way.
Yeah, one of the areas that I've gotten most fired up on over the last couple of years is there's a few so-called industry analysts that run around talking about the role of distribution, and what they tend to do is think about it from that standpoint. Is they tend to think about it from the standpoint of not B2B but B2C. And you're right. We all have experiences. We could go right now and order something on Amazon, and by the time I fly home, tomorrow it'll be there, right? But think about it, you got to think about it from a business standpoint and how much more complicated it really is. And there has to be more to it than just that, right? And that's the piece that sometimes people don't get relative to what you guys all do, right? And we can put a chart up and it'll make your eyes glaze over because there'll be 400 things that you do.
For sure.
But the fact of the matter is it's all being done on a regular basis, automated at scale. And that's the piece that I think people have to understand. And platforms, I think, will help do that over time, which is great.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
So, Marty, we've seen, obviously, over the last number of years, but the hardware volumes have decreased, and the services and software have definitely increased to the point where I actually think it's overtaken when you do the overall math. When I think I look at the IDC guys told me recently, when you look at the distributor panel data that comes in, last year it was, I think, $78 billion in the U.S. I think the hardware is less than 50% now, right? I think that's right, Eric, right? So based on that, what services, do you feel are needed to effectively support your customers and their customers? Mm-hmm. Because it's not just about anymore, delivering a box, right? Obviously.
For sure, but I do think the basics you were talking about before, Frank, are important.
Totally.
Yeah, if you screw up the transaction, we are the caretaker of the customer's image.
Yep.
So you can't even get to a services conversation unless you're doing all that stuff well. And I think all of us do a great job at that. And I think your coverage models are very important as well, and credit, downstream credit. So once you have all those perfect,
right,
I think it's you could start having the services conversation. So outside of cloud, which we've talked about that, orchestration and automation and making sure that we have services around that. I think what I'm seeing now is us helping our partners incubate a practice, right? And I think all of us do a pretty good job of it. And you know, we have a lot of SMBs in mid-market companies come to us and they say, listen, we want to get into security.
Right.
You know, what do you guys know? How do you help us build a practice? So we have a methodology on that. We call it AIM, assess, implement, and manage. So we assess what they need to do.
Yep.
Do they buy a practice, build a practice? Do they borrow a practice? You know, depending on how much money that they want to spend. And then, you know, we get them connected with the right vendors.
Yep.
And then what we try to do is put that business into a managed service or a cloud environment. That's one, and that's big for us. The second one is marketing services. We're definitely seeing a surge. Like, at the end of the day, listen, you know, our role is we're the connective tissue between, you know, the vendors and the resellers. Mm-hmm. So outside of the events, like PartnerFi and TechSelect and VTN and all that, we, I think what we're trying to really do is help tee up syndicated content for our VARs through our vendor partners that's automated. Mm-hmm. So how do we get more automated marketing messages out there? Anthony Graziano has a program or a platform that we have called Market Shift, where we tee up a vendor solution and our partners can actually white label that and send it out to theirs. Yeah. So that's a big one too. And then third-party logistics for our vendors. It's huge. Yeah. I mean, and actually, you know, Kirk, when we were slinging 3Com NIC cards, trying to make spiffs back in 1995 at Ingram, you know, they built an unbelievable 3PL platform and ended up selling it a few years ago, and that's still big. I mean, for D&H right now, that business is growing in leaps and bounds. So that's a service that we're providing to our vendors. Our vendors still do direct business. They have a .com motion in many cases, and we're the logistics experts, and we can help them take costs out of their model by moving to a 3PL environment. And CPFR, we help them with the planning, we help them with replenishment, and that's a big deal in our business, and I think there's a lot of money to be made and costs to be taken out of our vendors' models with that.
Well, the comment about spiffs warms my heart because I love having that comment, having that conversation.
3C, 509B,
Yeah,
1000 PK.
Exactly.
You remember.
Yeah. So, and the other thing I'll comment on, because I spent a couple years at a solution provider, and I'll tell you, I underestimated, as a vendor executive, particularly one that, you know, tried to spend time with their partners, you think you really understand that environment. And what I realized very quickly is I really didn't understand that environment, at least not at the level you needed at the business level. And the comment you made about helping start practices and invest in practices, we underestimate what that really is. So you take you know, in my case, it was a $120 million solution provider. It was tough to figure out how we were going to go get $500,000 to invest in 2 certified security experts to help us build out our MSSP. It was a major investment. Sure. I mean, you know, and so that service that you all are now beginning to provide beyond the financing, right, that you mentioned, Patrick, but just the expertise to help them get started is a really big deal. Yeah. It's a really big deal. And I think it's underestimated, frankly, by the supplier community, you know, at least in my sense it is. Okay, any other comments on any of that? Because I've got one last question that I will ask all of you, and that's really this. So what do you all want and need from the suppliers in this room, right? What's important to you? What message do you want to kind of provide them? You want to start?
I'll take it first. Automation. You know, work with us on connectivity, on APIs. And then I would say the other one, just to keep it simple, is a very predictable and speed to market from special bid processes and pricing. A lot of our vendors that are slow lose out on opportunities. And some of the direct folks that are not in this room are very fast at doing that. So we, as a collective, you know, group, lose business because sometimes we're not fast enough. So that's what I would ask of the vendors. Automation and speed is very important in our business because there's an end user waiting on the other end, and typically there's 3 or 4 solution providers that are actually working on the same deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Kirk?
That's great.
I would say number one, API connections. That's the key for where we're at right now. And the second one that we always tell our partners is if you're ever coming against a hurdle or you're struggling in an area, reach out to your distributor. We all enjoy those articles that come out on the disintermediation of distribution, whether it was the internet, the cloud, or whatever else, and look at the combined size. And it's because we focus on how can we take the problems away from you and how can we take them away from our partners.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of move up Maslow a little bit to self-actualization, and it's really about aligning self-interest on a strategy around how you're going to use distribution. Because I love what you said, what you both said. That's absolutely what we need, but I think it starts with what is the relationship? How are you using distribution to go faster and scale your business? And then let's get together and really understanding that so that we can develop the right program for you and you can develop the right program internally to be able to use distribution. It requires thoughtful practice and process and strategy from both sides for it to be wildly successful. And I think we all would agree there are suppliers out there that get that they just are like burning up the market because they're using distribution in the way that distribution is supposed to be used, in many ways that are not the typical ways that distribution has been used. But that is because it's a process around a symbiotic relationship and strategy where there's aligned self-interest, and it really can be win-win.
Yep. Patrick?
For me, it's early visibility on your product roadmaps and requirements to take your products to market. Because so AI is a good example. That's going to change a lot of things in the spec for your products and what you need from us to be successful and spread your products into the market. Early notice, early visibility is going to enable us to adjust our go-to-market and value prop for you.
Yep.
And look, for example, what happened with the platform. Okay, it took us some time to get to proper platform, so the earlier the better.
Yep. Yeah, well, that's great. Look, and I'll end with this, and I said this, we had a session yesterday with with some vendors and the CFOs from the vendors, as well as the CFOs from the distributors, and we got in a room for about 3 or 4 hours yesterday, and the idea was to help educate, the folks in the supplier community that don't spend as much time, right? And I said there, and I'll say it again, and I've been saying for years, the one question or the one thing that none of the folks on this panel, and certainly any other distributor folks in the room, want to ever hear from one of the suppliers is, gee, I didn't know you did that.
Yeah.
And it comes up all the time. It's, geez, I didn't know you did that. And so to Kirk's point, ask. Get engaged. If you got a problem you're trying to solve, get in the room and start talking to your distributor. And what you're going to find is they've probably built out a practice or a process that'll solve it, or have enough built out already that they can then just customize it. So that to me is a key deal. So look, I want to thank everybody for coming.